I'm gonna go. I'm gonna turn this off and then hang on in the back while we play. I was looking for something that was uplifting for our Christmas, and all I could find this cartoon of a snowman fighting a reindeer, and my wife goes, "Well, that's Olaf from some Frozen." I go, "What's Frozen?" I don't know what Frozen is. So we're gonna try to turn the lights off and at least put a smile on your face this morning. Y'all ready to smile? All right, here we go. Hit number one. Hit one.
Ooh, hello.
That was funny, wasn't it? I'd never seen it before. All right, there we go. I can see now. How's everybody doing this morning? I tell you what, we're running Alan, our sound man's out. We got Bobby back there. He's trying to do the camera, the lighting, and everything. So, and I'm out of breath from swinging those drumsticks. That's a lot of work. Mike, we'll redo that, okay? All right, we'll redo that as soon as we figure out what's going on with our wireless mic situation. Woo! I need to exercise. You know, the whole Christmas story, it's kind of weird. I'm going to talk about not a Christmas story today, but it's on the way to the Christmas story. Because 2,000 years before there was two teenagers headed to Bethlehem to have a baby. They weren't going there to have a baby. They were going there to pay some taxes, and they had a baby while there. 2,000 years before that, God came to a man named Abram, who would later be renamed to Abraham, and he made him a promise that sounded unbelievable because this man was 80 years old and he had a wife that was 70 years old, and they had never had any children. She was barren. But God comes to this man named Abram and makes this promise. He says, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through you. And if you're 80 and your wife's 70, you're going, I don't think so, right? I don't even have a family. How's all the world going to be blessed through me or my family? And then we talked about last week that God gave Abraham and Sarah a miracle child. Anybody remember the miracle child name? This is a test. That's right, Isaac, his name. And Isaac got married to Rebekah. And Rebekah and Isaac had a son named, anybody remember? You guys weren't paying attention last week. Jacob. Remember Jacob? Jacob married his two cousins. That's right. You guys remember that part. You remember the weird stuff. Yeah, we remember that. He married his cousin wives. This was a dysfunctional family, by the way. We call them one of the great Old Testament families, not because the family was that great, but God did great things despite the family, right? And Jacob and Leah and Rachel, along with a couple of handmaidens thrown in there, had 12 sons. You remember that? And each of these sons would grow up to be the head, the 12 tribes of Israel. The one on the end there with the multicolored coat was named? There. Oh, yeah, we're doing good now. We're doing good. Joseph. We told the whole crazy Joseph story. Remember his brothers, his 11 other brothers sold him into slavery. And through a weird set of circumstances, one day he finds himself standing in front of the Pharaoh of Egypt, and he interprets Pharaoh's dream, and he says, Pharaoh, There's going to be 7 years of abundance followed by 7 years of famine. And if you don't start storing up grain and wheat right now, we're all going to starve to death. And Pharaoh said, man, you're smart. God's on you. And I tell you what, I'm going to make you second in charge of all of Egypt. And he made this kid that was sold into slavery by his brothers second in charge of Egypt. And they stored up the grain. And when the famine hit, Egypt was saved. But all the surrounding nations began to starve, including his original family, Jacob and his 11 brothers. And so they the father sends them over to Egypt to get some grain. And of course, you know how the story ends. Joseph ends up saving the entire family from starvation. They're also thrilled that they all moved to Egypt. You may not know that. They moved out of Israel, the promised land, into Egypt, where there was plenty of food for everybody to eat. And when they got to Egypt, they were considered second-class citizens. This family who had started to grow kind of into a lot of people. And over the years, there became so many of these Israelites that the Pharaoh and the other Egyptians go, we got to do something with all these people, and say they put them into bondage. And if you think, at that point, if you remember the promise that God was going to bless the whole world through Abram and his family, if you're in bondage, it doesn't look like you're going to be blessing anybody. But and you may think, why would God do that to his own people? Well, he wanted to keep them together, to grow them as a nation. And there may have been other ways to do it, but this is how God chose to do it. But 400 years into that slavery comes a man out of the line of Levi, one of the original brothers. And the man that came out of the line of Levi, do y'all know who that man was? That's right, Moses. I got a picture of Moses. I was having fun with Google and image and clip art yesterday. And Moses, through all these miraculous miracles, leads the people out of bondage into the promised land. And the promise is back on. Remember the promise? Looked like it was off. Then it was back on. The promise is back on. I'm going to bless all the peoples on the earth through you and your family. And they go to the promised land, and when they get to the promised land, everything is going real good. Now, today I want to talk about one of the lines of one of those original 12 brothers. His name was Judah, and out of Judah comes a son named Perez. Now, these are big, hard Bible names, except for this one. That's why I said it. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to have this side say the next name, and then this side say the next name, because we're going to go through the line of Judah real quick, okay? All right, so you guys got the next one, right? And and Perez had a son named oh, y'all did good. Y'all went to college a little bit over here, okay? How about? And Hezron had a son named Oh, they're like, yeah, we got that one. All right. And Ram had a son named Abby. Come on, what's the matter with you folks? Who said that good? Aminadab. There you go. He's going, what's up with that name, Dad? See it? See? What's up? And all right. And Aminadab had a son named. Oh, man, this side they're so proud of themselves, aren't they? And y'all can do. And Nashon had a son named. And Salmon had a son named. Oh, y'all kind of remember that name, Boaz. You grew up in church. Boaz had a wife named Ruth. That's right, he did, right? And Boaz and Ruth had a son named, it's your turn. Obed, that's right. And Obed had a son named Jesse. And Jesse had a son named David. Oh, let's stop right there. That's far enough for today. I was going through this lineage, on the way to the promise, and I got to stop at David because this is a cool story. Who doesn't know the story of little shepherd boy David, right? Everybody knows the little shepherd boy. And so I'm going to stop here for two reasons. One, I ran out of clip art. And number two is, everybody loves the story. It's one of the greatest underdog stories ever told. The shepherd boy overcoming great fear, and that's something that we need to learn to do to overcome our fears. And so I think if we can look at this story today, we may take away something that we can use in our lives. That's what I'm thinking. And I don't know about you, if you've ever been scared before, but I heard about an old lady who came home to a burglar. And And all she could think to do was yell out a Bible verse at the burglar. So she yelled out, Acts 2:38. And the guy stopped in his tracks. I don't know if you know Acts 2:38, but it stopped. Repent in the name of Jesus and be forgiven for your sins. And it just froze him, and he froze. And so much so that she was able to pick up the phone, call the police. They showed up. They put a guy in handcuffs, put him in the back of the squad car, asked the lady, why didn't he run away? She goes, well, I yelled a Bible verse, Acts 2:38. And they went back to the guy in the back of the squad car, and they go, you froze because of a Bible verse? He goes, a Bible verse? She said she had an Acts in 2:38. Are you kidding me? That's the way that one goes. It's an oldie, but a goodie, right? So most of us know the story of David and Goliath. That was the big giant name. But I got some details for you. Maybe you don't know. When David was, during this time, he was a teenager, and he was a shepherd boy. He wasn't a part of the army or anything, but he was just a shepherd. And Israel, for their first time in their entire history, this family that had grown into a nation, that had now been taken to the promised land, for the first time in history, had their first king. And how they got their first king is a whole nother story. But one day the people go to the prophet Samuel and say, hey, we want a king like all the other nations. And God goes, you don't need a king. I'm your king. And they'll know we want a king. And so God accommodated, again, human beings, our bad decisions, God accommodated, because God throughout the Old Testament is always accommodating us. And sometimes our ideas take us off the rails a little bit. But God goes, okay, I'll give you a king. And the first king they ever had was King Saul. Not the greatest king. Y'all are still playing the game. Way to go. That's good. King Saul, not the greatest king of all time, but that was their first king. And during this time, the nation of Israel, when you have a king, this is why God didn't want Israel to have a king. Because when you have a king, then you have to have an army. And when you have an army, then you have to have enemies. And you're always, and then you have to raise taxes. And it's just not fun, right? And so during the reign of King Saul, they had an enemy. Their arch enemy was called the Philistines, the Philistines, however you want to say it. Pecan or pecan. Anyway, one day the army of Israel, though, has to go out and fight their arch enemy, the Philistines, in a place called the Valley of Elah. Now, you can actually go and visit this. It's a real valley. It's a real place. This is the modern day picture of this particular valley over there. Here's how it was. The Israelites were on one side of the valley up on the hilltop, and the Philistines were on the other side of the valley on the other side. And all of a sudden, this huge, enormous guy comes out of the Philistine army down the side of the mountain there into the valley floor. And it was a guy named Goliath, right? And Goliath stood and he shouted, this is what he said, to the ranks of Israel, why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine? And are you not the servants of Saul? And then he goes, choose a man, and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us. Woo. Now, although this battle wasn't a typical kind of battle fought in those days, it wasn't unheard of, right? And but the difference with this guy was he was enormous. He was the largest man pretty much anybody had ever seen. The Bible says he stood 9 feet 9 inches tall. That's weighing anywhere between 600 and 800 pounds. And where did Goliath sleep? Wherever he wanted. Y'all don't know that gorilla joke? Okay, we'll come back to that. All right. I try to think about how can I explain the pure size of this guy. So I got a little scale up here. There's 10 feet, okay? And I needed something to give it perspective, right? So you would know how big that is. So I took a picture of myself, and I put that in there. There I am right there. I'm 5'7". That's a little distracting for church. Let's take that down. All right, anyway. But I just wanted you to get an idea. Anyway, this guy was big. He's big, and the Israelites find themselves facing this giant, and here's what Goliath says next to them. He says, This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man, and let us fight each other. On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed, and they were terrified. You better believe they were dismayed and terrified. They didn't know what to do. You want to go? I don't want to go. You want to go? I ain't going down there, right? How many of us would go down there? How much fear would that bring into your life, right? To have to go fight. I haven't been in a fight since junior high school. And the reason is I'm not a good fighter. And number two is I would probably get beat up. So I'm not going to do it. So here's what, but I do have an incident that I recall when me and my son Stephen went golfing. He was a 17-year-old teenager, bigger than I was, and we went golfing over at Bluebonnet. It's down there at the road one time. And on that particular day, Stephen was hitting the golf ball very far. And you may or may not know anything about golf, but the etiquette of golf is you let the people in front of you get far enough down the course so that when you hit your ball, you don't hit any of them in their head or anything like that. Well, we would wait till they got about 330, yards out, and I would hit my little 150-yard ball, and Stephen would, on that particular day, he was hitting it over 300. And it would roll up to their feet, and this one little, he looked short from my angle, but he was way out there. He would yell back, "What are you guys doing? We're gonna come," and it was using bad language. And we go, "Sorry," I yelled 4. You're supposed to yell 4 if you hit your ball too far. 4, that way they look up and it hits them right in the face. Anyway, on that particular day, and this happened like 2 or 3 times, and we'd go, "Sorry, he's just hitting the ball so far. We'll let you go on the next hole." Now we get to the 17th hole, and it's just a little par 3. A par 3 is not very far. It's just right over the water onto a little green, and I take out my sweet 8-iron. You remember, who were here that day I hit the golf ball into the audience? That's what kind of church you're visiting today. I hit a golf ball, but I didn't hurt anybody except Bobby. He is going to get better and come back to church one day. But anyway, so Stephen hits right onto the green. It's my turn, and these folks had gone to the last hole, the 18th hole, and I'm on this 17th hole, and I hit the ball, and it's beautiful, but it's going a little far, and it starts drifting, and it's drifting over to the tee box. This is where they're going to hit their ball, and it hits the top of their cart. Bam. And this guy, I just hear this screaming, "I'm going to kill you. I got my wife here. She's pregnant." I look at my son and goes, "He brought his wife golfing? That's weird." Anyway, I wasn't too worried until I saw the guy come around the corner running with a golf club in his hand. And my son's there. He's 17. And I do what every responsible dad would do. I got behind him. I said, "Protect me. Protect me." And I was so scared. This guy, "I'm going to kill you." And he's running. And I was like, "What are we going to do?" He says, "Dad, you're such a weenie." And he got about halfway. He finally stopped. The guy was like 4'8". And he goes, "Ah." And he went back. And I said, "Okay, I'm not." So that was as close as I came to my fear, but nothing compared to this little kid. He walks out. I mean, he sees this. There's this giant, this Philistine armies out there, and so I don't know what terrifies you or what scares you. When you were kids, right? We had to have the light on, or we don't like the dark, or the monsters under the bed, or the monsters in the closet. As we get older, those fears go away, but we just replace them with different kinds of fears. Now, as an adult, we have all kinds of other fears, right? We don't care about the monsters under the bed, although I still don't sleep with my arm hanging off, because that part is real. Anyway, but we have all kinds of fears, like fear of losing our job, fear of losing our house, if we lose our job, or losing our retirement because the stock market crashes. I've lived long enough to see 3 stock market crashes. Don't worry about it. Fear of losing somebody that you love. Maybe you're in a marriage and you're fearful that your marriage is just not working out. Or some people are fearful that they're never going to find that right one to marry. And the people that are married go, "You ain't got nothing to fear, dude." Anyway, we fear for our children, don't we? If you have kids, aren't you afraid? Man, they got these computers. They can see things they were never supposed to see at such young ages. And And we fear for our children, and we hope they make good decisions, and we hope they hang around the right kinds of friends. And we got, as adults, our fears don't go away, they just change. And if you've asked an adult, they're bigger fears. So the one thing that fear, though, has all in common, everybody has this in common. All fear comes from not knowing what's going to happen next. That's where fear comes from, the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. And if the unknowns of life, it is the what ifs of life. What if I lose my job? What if I get this virus? What if my business deal doesn't work out? What if nobody ever asks me out on a date? What if, what am I going to do? All our fears come from the uncertainty of what's going to happen next. That's where it all comes from. Every one of us in this room. And so that's what, and what ifs just create fear in us. But as we look at the story today, and we're going to look at David in particular, you're going to notice that David didn't have any fear. He had no fear. And like, what? How could he possibly not have any fear? Right? Because his story was full of all kinds of what ifs. The number one what if I go down there, and what if I die? Because that guy's probably going to kill me. But for some reason, David wasn't focused on the what ifs. David was focused on something else altogether. That whatever it was brought him peace, eliminated fear, and filled it with peace. So if we can figure out what David did, I think it has the potential to change all our lives in this room. We can take a little bit of the story, a story that you know by heart, a story you've always heard, whether you've been in church or not. There's some valuable lessons in here that we need to look at. We all know that David was a shepherd boy around 17 years old. Wasn't part of the Israelite army at this time, but he had 3 older brothers that were. And those 3 older brothers was on that hillside looking over that valley, looking down at that giant on a particular day. And so David is asked by his dad, Jesse, to take some food out to the battlefield to find out what's going on. Are we winning? Are we losing? Everybody back home didn't have a clue what was going on. And so Jesse, his dad, sends David out to check on him. And when David goes out, he sees what everybody else sees. He sees the Israelite army on one side, and he sees the Philistines on the other, and he sees this big giant guy in the middle of the valley floor yelling obscenities. And so David goes up to one of the soldiers and says, how long has this been going on? How long has that guy been down there yelling up at this army? And the soldier goes, it's been going on for 40 days. We're just standing here 40 days. And David says this, what will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? And that's a normal question, right? What's in it for me? Like, what do you get if you go down and kill him, right? But I want you to look at the second part of David's question. He says this. He says, who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? The living God. And so I don't know if you remember what they were calling, Goliath was calling the Israelites. He said, are you the army of Saul? Right? And David says, who's defiling the army of God here? Right? Who's defiling? David walks up, sees what everybody else is seeing, except David has a different perspective. Remember what Goliath had called him. He called them the servants of Saul. And I'm sure if you would have walked up to one of the soldiers that day and said, are you a soldier, a servant of Saul? They'd have gone, yes, we are, and we're scared to death. Right? We are scared to death. But David saw it differently. Instead of being focused on the what ifs of this particular situation, what if he kills me? He was focused on the who is. Who is. I'm not concerned with the what ifs. I'm concerned with the who is of this situation. Who does this guy think he is to challenge the living God? And that got me to thinking, if we are living our lives for God, right, all of us, if we're being obedient to what God has asked us to be obedient to, if you truly get up in the morning, you truly believe that there is a creator God who so loves you, who has made a way for you in his son, Jesus Christ. If you truly believe that, then why do we have fear, right? Why can't we have peace? Shouldn't our cry be what Paul would say in Romans 8:31, if God is with us, then who can stand against us? Shouldn't that be our cry? Isn't that where our peace can be found? In knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that there is a God that so loves us, that there is a God that cares about us, that there's a God that cares where we're going to be tomorrow and the next day, and he's got them all. And he says, you don't worry about that stuff. You worry about today, and I'll stand with you, and you'll stand strong. When you are weak, you're made strong through our Heavenly Father. This guy, David says, this guy ain't picking a fight with us. He's picking a fight with God. That's the way David saw it. That's the way we should see it when we go out and we try to battle the world and the giants of our life. But this whole army was so caught up in their what-ifs and their fears, they completely lost sight of the who is of this particular situation. And so David is summoned by King Saul. And because the soldiers go, you need to hear this kid. He's making some bold statements. So they bring this little kid, David, over to King Saul. And David said this to Saul. He says, let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go out and fight him. And it says, Saul replied, you are not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You're only a young man. And he's been a warrior from his youth. That guy knows how to fight. Right? How many of you have heard, you can't do something? You can't do that. You don't have what it takes. You don't have this. You don't have that. You don't have the right education. All you got is a high school diploma, right? Or, you don't have the talent. I mean, all our lives, we have people that come into our lives and say, you don't have what it takes. But you are standing in as one of God's children, okay? And you can do whatever God has called you to do because he is bigger than anybody in this room. And so David looks at Saul and he says this. He had a few stories to tell Saul. You might think I'm a shepherd boy, but being a shepherd boy is dangerous. He says this, the Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear is going to rescue me from the hand of this Philistine. Okay, there's danger, and I've been protected by my God. You guys are focused on the what-ifs. I'm focused on the who is, and my God is faithful to deliver me and to take care of me. And he boldly, it's a bold statement. This kid's talking to the king. He's talking to the king here. And maybe Saul saw some kind of confidence in this kid that he didn't even find in himself because for some reason he says, okay, we're going to send down probably the skinniest, littlest guy we got to fight this giant, right? And so Saul dresses up David in his own armor, and he's got his breastplate, he's got his shield, he's got his helmet, and he's got his chin guard, and David starts walking around. He's uncomfortable. It's all too heavy, and he finally goes, I can't wear this. I can't wear all this stuff. And he just throws it off. And David takes the armor off, and he grabs it. He says, I can't wear it. It's just what-if protection. I don't need it. And he takes it off. And David goes down, and he meets Goliath. And this is what he says. This is what Goliath says to this little kid who stands before him. He says, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give you flesh. I'll give your flesh to the birds and to the wild animals. Of course, this is where I would run. I don't know about you. He says, you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. And then he goes, this day the Lord will deliver you into the hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This is where it gets PG-13. You know how this story ends. I don't need to tell you. But, the Olaf thing and the reindeer inspired me to bring in one more animated series. Here you go. Hit number 1 back there for me on the light.
You come to me with sword and spear, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts.
Your God is weak!
My God is not weak.
My God is not weak. When you are feeling like the world is pressing down on you, you got nowhere else to go, and you're full of fear and you're full of what ifs, remember that your Creator created you because he loves you, and he showed his love through his son Jesus. And you're not weak because you serve a strong, strong God. You know, the Philistines should have destroyed the Israelites that day. The promise should have been dead. But because of the courage of a young man and his God, the promise stayed alive. And if you come back next week, we're going to get to that promise. We're going to get to that promise. Fear kills everything in your life. It kills your dreams. It can make you sick. Fear can put you in the hospital. Fear can hold you back. Fear can paralyze you from doing what you need to be doing. And so I have to ask a question. What is the benefit of allowing fear to take hold of your life? When God wants to take hold of your life and bring peace into your life. Wouldn't we like some peace? Wouldn't we like a little peace? Then stop talking about the what ifs and start talking to the who is. You know, David would go from this story and he would grow up. He would be the next king of this nation of Israel. And it was a glorious time for Israel. I mean, it was the height of that nation. And as an old man, David would sit down now, an old man, and he would write many songs and many poems. And a lot of those writings and songs of David would get put into the book of Psalms that you carry around in your Old Testament. And you can go and read some of those. And I believe that David, in a moment of reflection, as this very old man, sat down and penned the words that you are probably all familiar with, because probably when you've gone to a funeral, you've heard them. But he pens the words of the 23rd Psalms. And he's an old man, and I just think he remembered back in that day, in that valley of Elah, when he faced a giant. And we're going to end with this as our prayer, as I read it to you today, and you take it home with you, and you live it like you know it, and quit worrying about all the what ifs, and start thinking about and talking to your who is. Would you bow? The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the path of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You are my rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare us a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord